with her cancer that she's being treated for. You've been aware and you've been praying for and been giving and sharing in their lives for the past couple of years in this area. And this morning, we thought it would be good if she could to come and to share with us what God has been doing and what God has been teaching her and their family during this time. So Jenny, it's good to have you with us. Why don't you come right on up?
When Heath told me that Mr. Clay asked me to speak, I said, I'll do it if you'll speak with me. And he said the volleyball team and basketball team will find this surprising, but he was afraid he would cry. And so he said, I can't. And so I said, well, then you have to at least stand by me. And so he was supposed to be following me up here, but he's not. So the snow that you see out there is a direct result of me. It didn't quite work out how I wanted. I prayed for a complete snow day so that no one would be here. As I was walking over, I was praying, well, just let there be a fire drill. And literally there were sirens. And I was like, oh my goodness, my prayers are really being answered, but they never showed up. So my next option is if anyone wants to go to sleep, you are more than welcome to 7-Eleven. Everyone has my permission to go. I will take the punishment for whatever trouble you get in. Just like Heath, my dad, Tony, my family can stay and I'll be good. For us, this whole journey started almost 2 years ago in March, and I was having stomach problems, so I kept going to the doctor for several months, and they just couldn't figure out what was wrong. And finally, at the end of July, we went to another friend that's a doctor, and he sent us to a surgeon, and they said my appendix had ruptured, so I had surgery, and that was supposed to be the end of it, and it done. And over the next couple of months, I just kept having pain. So finally, after several procedures, they said that an abscess had formed from the appendix rupturing and that I'd have to have another surgery. So before the surgery, the Lord had given me a couple of verses. One of them was Psalms 33:18 through 19, but the eyes of the Lord are on those who fear him, on those whose hope is in his unfailing love, to deliver them from death and keep them alive in famine. And the other one was Psalm 34:19, a righteous man may have many troubles, but the Lord delivers him from them all. He protects all his bones, not one of them will be broken. And I just thought that those verses were for just a simple surgery that I was going in for, and little did I know, however, the next few days and few weeks, how the Lord would use those verses to bring comfort to me and to show me that he was already going ahead of me and before me before even the surgery, and just giving me verses that would comfort me. And so the day after my surgery, I'll never forget the whole atmosphere. It was just Heath and I in the hospital room. It was about 7 o'clock at night, and our surgeon was about our age, and he had become a friend of ours, and he comes in, and there was a baseball game on, and there was just something different, and he just said, well, the pathologist gave me some news, and he was shocked at the news, and he said, and I'm shocked at the news, and it's cancer. And those are not words that, I just never thought that would happen to me. I've never, worried about that happening, never thought about it. And I just remember bursting into tears, and the first question I asked, I was just, am I going to die? And he just said, I don't know. He said, we're going to have to do more tests, and he said, there's just a rare cancer that we don't know a lot about, and we're just going to have to find out more. And so I can remember Heath leaving the room and starting to call my family, and you know how, if you know him, he's just kind of a jokester, and so he calls my sister, and then even one of my friends, and he tells them, Jenny has cancer. Well, they just start dying laughing. They're like, Heath, seriously, you shouldn't joke about that. He literally has to deliver this news to them 5 or 7 times until they're finally like, oh my goodness, you're serious. And so it seemed like, within 10 minutes of the doctor having been in there, Doug Melton, our pastor, was there, my mom and dad, Tony, my brother and sister-in-law, who at this time was 6 months pregnant with her 4th kid. They live almost in Tulsa. It seemed like 30 minutes after the doctor had told me, here they come walking in the room. And I just couldn't believe that everyone, and then, friends, this was, by then 9 o'clock at night, and friends, your parents were coming by the hospital room to pray with us, and I remember just thinking, I can't believe that they dropped everything that they were doing and went to all that trouble and came to see us. And over the next few days, as I would wake up in the hospital every day, I would just see them lined up and just see different friends that had come through. And it meant more to me than they'll ever understand. But a few thoughts the Lord brought to mind right when the surgeon had told me, literally. And one of them was Mrs. Fowler, the first grade teacher. I was homeschooling Macy last year in Connor. And Mrs. Fowler had called me the week before the surgery, and she said, hey, what do you think of Macy coming to school the week you're in the hospital and the week after, so that she won't get behind and you don't have to worry about anything to do with her? And I remember the Lord just whispering to me, see, I've already gone before you, and I'm starting to take care of you, just like I'm going to do through this whole journey. I already have Macy taken care of. She'll be used to being in school. Now you don't have to worry about what to do with her when chemo starts. And so it was so good for the Lord to show me that not only had he given me those verses, but he was already going ahead of me, taking care of my children. That night when everyone went home, I can remember Heath and I laying in the hospital bed together and just talking about everything. And, we said that we committed that my personality is just very private person. If it were up to me, I would just go through this quietly, get done with it, and then go on with my life. But the Lord just really made it apparent to us from the beginning that that's not how he wanted this done. He wanted us to share with people as we went along what the Lord was doing for us, and let other people walk this journey with us. And I remember telling him, Heath, if one person comes to know the Lord through this cancer, it will be worth it. And then a few days later, Junior Hendrickson gave me this sermon by John Piper. I know y'all know who that is. And the night before he had gone in for his surgery, he had cancer and he was having surgery. He wrote this sermon, Don't Waste Your Cancer, and his first point was, you will waste your cancer if you do not believe it is designed for you by God. And he goes on to say that God knows every molecule that was inside my body, and he knew the ones that were going to form together and form that cancer, and he could have stopped it, but he chose not to because he has a purpose for my cancer. And I can't tell you how many times throughout this that when I start thinking of things, the Lord will bring to mind Chloe, Strickland, and Cole, and Faith, and Colton during the first semester with his injury. And the Lord just brings to mind, and I just pray for y'all that you'll realize that what you're going through, it does have a purpose. And you may not see it this side of heaven, but it does have a purpose. And the second thing that John, of his list of things that he said was, you'll waste your cancer if you believe it is a curse and not a gift. And Psalms 84:11 says, no good thing does he withhold from those who walk uprightly. And so the Lord just reminded me that we need to look at the good that is coming from what you're going through. And through me sharing this morning, that's what I want to do, is focus on the good of what the Lord's done for us. And a few days after we got home from the hospital, my brother Tony came by, and he was been so faithful through this whole thing to stop by and check on us and see what he can do for us and pray with me and to faithfully share verses that the Lord's given to him. And one of them was Deuteronomy 1:8, 1-3, and 7-10, and it's really long, so I put it up there so you could kind of concentrate on it. Be careful to follow every command I'm giving you today, so that you may live and increase and may enter and possess the land that the Lord promised on oath to your forefathers. Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the desert. So for me, my cancer is this desert, for 40 years, to humble you and to test you, in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. And he humbled you, causing you to hunger, and I just think of my chemo, and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your fathers had known, to teach you that man does not live by bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. And that's really what Heath and I have learned so much through this is, we have only made it through because of the Lord. It has been nothing that Heath and I have done, because we know us, and we know our hearts, and we know what we're capable of, and it's not much. For the Lord your God is bringing you, this is just such a beautiful promise, into a good land, a land filled with streams and pools of water with springs flowing, a land where bread will not be scarce. You can dig copper out of the hills. And I just picture that day when I'm going to be healed, when there's going to be no more pain, no more surgeries, no more chemo, no more sickness. And it's so encouraging to me, just that beautiful picture of a good land that he's going to bring me in today, not someday. When you have eaten and are satisfied, praise the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. And that's really what Heath and I have committed to do throughout this, is just to praise the Lord. And we want to teach our children. We've been open with them about what he's done and tried to share with them everything along the way, the things the Lord has done, because we want them to be changed through this journey. And then it says, be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe his commands, his laws, and decrees that I am giving you this day. And so we don't want it to just be something that we've gone through and we're done, and then we just, okay, let's just forget about that. But we really want it to be something that, you know, we carry the rest of our lives, and that it changes us and changes our children. Immediately when I was in the hospital, Jean Strickland and many of your moms, they formed a prayer group for me, just for ladies that would just pray over me and intercede for me. And the first prayer meeting that they had was about a week after I got out of the hospital. And I mean, it was one of the most just amazing things I've ever been a part of, just seeing the power of God. It was just unbelievable. And then they really committed, and they stayed true to that commitment over these past couple of years. And they have texted us, prayed for us, sent meals, helped with the kids, helped with things around the house. And they'll never understand how when Heath and I go share somewhere, they are so much a part of our story. And you're so much a part of our story. Just the way you would encourage us that the Lord used y'all. And I mean, we tell people it's nothing we've done. The Lord has used y'all to teach us how to minister to other people and to encourage them and in the matter of a crisis. So after the diagnosis, I had to wait 5 weeks until MD Anderson would see us after his surgery. And so 5 weeks after that, we took our first trip to MD Anderson, and I can just remember walking in. It's really, Heath and I have just said, it's such a dark and depressing place, because everyone there is there because they have cancer, and they don't know, am I going to die? Am I going to go through this, and it's just going to keep reoccurring, and this is going to be my life? And it's just really a hopeless place. And so Heath and I's desire was that they would see something different in us, and that difference would be the Lord, and that they would see that even our hope wasn't dependent upon what the doctors told us. And that wasn't easy for me, because every single time I go, I ask them, well, so what does that mean for me? How long do I have? Is this going to come back? Am I going to die from that? I mean, I ask them, and they won't really tell me, but I ask them, and I try, I tell the Lord, I know I'm not dependent upon that, on those numbers. I'm dependent upon you, and that's what I want, but it's hard for me. And our other desire was just to minister to the patients that were just sitting around us. Cancer, I remember our surgeon telling us that cancer is an old person's disease, so it's not normal when I go down there. I mean, it's old people, like 70, 80, and I shouldn't have said that. It's just older people. And, I'm so sorry. So I remember one time I went back to get my testing done, a scan, and everyone was in there, like your scrubs that you change into and blankets, and it was literally me and then just these elderly people, and everyone was like dropping their blanket or needing a drink. And so I was literally back there, like just kind of taking care of everyone, giving them their blankets and all this stuff. And the Lord just told, you're here for a reason. These people couldn't get up and get their blankets, and you can. And so, in every little thing, the Lord just reminded me that he had a purpose. So after we turned home from MD Anderson, they had called us with the results, because they didn't have the results when we were there, and it was a little different than what they had thought, and so it was a little worse. And so they said I would have to have this major surgery called the HIPEC, that's just for my kind of cancer, that we were really praying that I wouldn't have to have. And so even then, immediately when Heath called my family, we were actually in Tulsa, his parents, and he brought me home, and my family immediately, Johnny and Heather from Tulsa, Tony, my mom and dad, Pastor Doug, came over and prayed with me and encouraged me. And I remember one of them asking something like, to Heath about, well, how are you going to respond? What do you think of this? And I just remember Heath saying, it's not like something's all of a sudden clicked and I'm going to respond in a certain way. He said, how I've lived my life up to this point, in my Bible study and my prayer, the godly men around me at CHA that have influenced me, you already decide how you're going to respond in a crisis. You don't just get in the middle of it and think, how am I going to respond? And that was just so good for me to hear that even with my children, I need to be training them now in everything they do, because we don't know what's going to happen, and you don't know what's going to happen, how you're going to respond in a crisis. That very next week, I started my first round of chemo, and the night before, those same women had gotten together and prayed over us, and one of them had actually, her husband, Joan Day, her husband had cancer, and so she had said, you should invite your friends to come. And so I did, and that made all the difference in the world. Every other Monday through every one of my treatments, many of your moms would give up their Monday to come and sit with me all day long. Some of my friends would have to get babysitters, they'd have to leave their jobs, and that meant so much to me. And as a result of that, we would, most people there, it's just kind of a big open room, and you each have your little just section and kind of a curtain that you can close where you're receiving your treatment. And they had a couple of rooms, and so they would save a room for us every week because they knew we would have such a big crowd. And because of my friends that came, I would bake a dessert every week, and we'd pass out goodie bags and passed out Bibles. And when my dad or Doug Melton would come up to see me, I'd take them around, and we'd introduce them to the patients that I'd met and pray over them in the ways that the patients could. And the patients would literally stop by our room and be like, what's going on in here? And because they just would have one person with them or be by themselves, and we were just dying laughing. It wasn't like I was there getting chemo. I literally looked forward to every Monday because I got to spend it with my friends. And that's just unusual, but it was a way that the Lord once again reminded me that He was going before me and taking care of me, and He'd be with me through every step of the way. And so because of those friends, it increased our witness that we had with the nurses and patients. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but the very last day of my treatment, the sophomore class last year would, every day Heath would tell me that someone would give a devotion, and they would faithfully pray for me every single day, he said. And so the last day of my treatment, they came up and they had little prayer cards and little goodie bags, and they passed them out to the patients, and they were wearing their Pray for Jenni t-shirts. And you don't realize what an impact it had on those nurses there to see high school kids that cared enough to come up and do that for people they didn't even know. And I remember as I was walking all out, I saw the doctors step out of the office, and they were just shaking their heads in awe. And so just the impact that you have had in this whole journey and the influence that you've had. I'm going to back up just a little bit. So after my second treatment of chemo, lots of my hair was falling out, just tons. And so I was so upset, and Heath was at a basketball game, and I was calling him. And when he got home that night and we were laying in bed, had done all right before this, but I was just like, I can't do this. I've had 2 treatments, and I was so sick, and now my hair was falling out, and I was like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do this 10 more times. I can't imagine it. And I remember he didn't know how to respond, and he's always so patient with me and giving me verses and encouraged me of what the Lord had done. And the next morning, he called me and he said that Mr. Little Jim had come up to him and said that every year Heath and Mrs. Little Jim would do a basketball camp one day over Christmas, and that would be the money we'd use for Christmas. Well, he hadn't even thought about doing it, and so he said Mr. or Mrs. Little Jim had come up to him and said that Gabe had come to them and said, we need to go ahead and do that camp, but we need to give all the money to the Kufahls. And he said, I don't need a Christmas. And Gabe will never understand how I was driving in the car when he told me that. And that was literally what the Lord used me to just, okay, Jenni, you can do this. You've done 2, you can do 10 more. a 16-year-old kid at school, I mean, he doesn't even know me that well, is literally, willing to sacrifice his Christmas for you. You can get through this. And it was just thing after thing like that the Lord used, things that y'all did to encourage me to get through this. A couple of days later, Austin McAllister sent a text to Heath with a picture of his basketball shoes before the game they were going to play that night, and he had written, "Bigger than basketball, praying for Jenni." And once again, Heath and I just looked at each other and just shook our heads, just thinking, we're not like that. I mean, we don't think of people that much. We don't pray for people that much. And it was just so humbling for us. About halfway through our treatment, we took our second trip back to MD Anderson, and the Lord's always faithful to encourage me through his word. Psalm 71:14 says, "But as for me, I will always have hope. I will praise you more and more." And the Lord just reminded me that no matter what the doctors were going to say, my hope was not in their diagnosis or their assessment of what was going to happen. It's in him. In Psalm 112:7-8, he gave me that morning, and it says, "He does not fear bad news, nor live in dread of what may happen, for he has settled in his mind that Jehovah will take care of him." And that verse, actually, a friend shared with me, and she gave it to me to put on my nightstand by my bed, and I just read it, and I put in it, "For Jenni has settled in her mind that Jehovah will take care of her." Back when I was first diagnosed, I mean, it was literally in my journal. I have it just a few days after I'd gotten home from the hospital, and the Lord had given me the verse Psalm 40:10, and it says, "I do not hide your righteousness in my heart. I speak of your faithfulness and salvation. I do not conceal your love and your truth from the great assembly." And like I'd said earlier, I'm a very private person. I would have rather gone through this alone, but the Lord really from the beginning made it very evident to me that he did not want me to be private with this, but just to share it. And he really had just kind of put on my heart that I was going to share in front of a large crowd, and I had no idea what that looked like. But for some reason, I had just thought of the Heritage Banquet. And every year, it seems like they have an alumni speak, and so I really thought that was going to be my great assembly. There's, several hundred people there. And so I can remember on the way home afterwards telling Heath, "I'm really disappointed. I really thought that's what the Lord was going to have me speak at." So a few days later, Heath was in the office, and Keith Jossell was in there, and Heath walks by, and Keith later told us that the Lord told him, "You need to give those Thunder Laker tickets to Heath." And he said he told the Lord, "I can't. I promised my wife I would take her. She would be so mad. I can't do it." So Heath walks back by, and he said, the Lord said, "You need to give those tickets to Heath." And he said, "I can't. I promised my wife. I'll give him another one. I can't do those." So then later, I mean, this is like an hour later, he's still at the school. Heath walks into someone else's office because Keith had moved, and the person says, "Happy birthday" to Heath. And Keith said he just threw his hands up and was like, "Okay, Lord, I get it. Heath, I have a birthday present for you. Here's tickets to the Thunder Laker game." So Heath tells his class, he says, "I'm going to go to the game early. I'm going to find the guy that picks the person to shoot the half-court shot. I'm going to shoot it, and I'm going to win the $20,000. So we get to the game early, find the guy. We find out it's couples night. I had no desire. I was like, "I'm so sorry. This was fun, but I'm not going out there." And so he's begging me and begging. And I was like, "Listen, you can pick the cutest Thunder cheerleader. I don't care. I'm not shooting it with you." So somehow he convinced me to do it, and so I went out there, and the rest is history. It's always fun to see again. I'd just like to say, if you'll notice, I was never with Heath in any of that celebration. After he won, I was standing half court of the Thunder Arena, and I was literally all by myself. Heath is running around celebrating with the Thunder cheerleaders, runs through the Lakers, through their little timeout group, hitting them on rears, giving them a high five. And so I finally just slowly start backing up because I realize I'm just all by myself. So after that, the guy interviewed us with the Thunder, and he said, "Now a few local media might call you, just to be prepared." And by the time we got home, it had been on ESPN Top 10. CNN had called us by 6 o'clock the next morning to say they wanted us on there. Good Morning America, Sports Center, all the local ones, Fox and Friends, newspaper, radio stations. And as this was happening over the next several days and we were being interviewed, the Lord just reminded me, he said, look at the great assembly I've given you. You had it, narrowed down to this, group of several hundred that you pictured were going to be your great assembly. And now I've given you, the world is your platform. This was seen, in other countries that people ended up donating to us because a result of this, of the fund that they set up through CHA, from Hong Kong and all over we got donations. And so it was just so neat how we could have never been so creative to think up, okay, let's give Heath tickets to his favorite team, the Lakers game, having won $20,000 to put into your medical fund, and then you can share. We could have never come up with that, but the Lord was so good. It was halfway through my treatments, and it was just such a boost for us to remind us that God does have a purpose for this cancer, and that I may not ever see the purpose this side of heaven, but that he has been so faithful to me, to encourage me through someone or something along the way. So last April, I was halfway through, and then the very last week of April, I finished my last chemo treatment. Then we had to wait about 6 weeks. In the first week of June, we went to MD Anderson, and I had surgery to remove the tumors, and they called us the next week and said, we feel like we got it all, you're cancer-free, you're done, go enjoy the summer with your kids and come back in 3 months. So that's what we did, and after 3 months, school had started, and it was September, and we do my scans and blood work here because it's so much cheaper than MD Anderson, and so we have to have it done before we go. So my nurse happened to call me here and said that it wasn't good news, that the blood work, they didn't look at the scans, but that just from the blood work, that they measure your tumor markers, and they could tell that they were very elevated, higher than when we knew I had had cancer. They were more than double that. And so I said, well, what does this mean? And she was like, well, we can't say for certain without looking at the scan, but we know from other people that this would mean that the cancer's returned and that it's, very active. So I was just crushed. Most people after just 3 months, it doesn't reoccur that quickly. And so that same day, literally a few months before this, someone had called and asked us to speak at something, and we had planned it for this day. And so Heath and I went to share, and we just talked about kind of everything I have, just taking them through the story and the half-court shot and all the Lord had done for us. And I remember when Heath and I got in the car, we just sat down and just kind of sat there for a minute and shook our heads, and he just said, can you believe that of all days we could have spoken, the Lord had us do it on the day that you would receive this bad news? And so now we were able to walk back through and recall and be reminded that this cancer has a purpose and that we may not ever know what it is here, but he was so faithful once again on the day that we needed encouragement to have us speak on this very day so that we could be reminded of all he'd done for us. So the very next week, we went to MD Anderson to talk to the doctors for my 3-month scan. And once again, the Lord's faithful to encourage me with scripture. And he gave me several. I was reading in Nahum 1:7 says, the Lord is good, a refuge in times of trouble. He cares for those who trust in him. And Nahum 1:12 and 13 says, although I have afflicted you, O Judah, I will afflict you no more. Now I will break their yoke from your neck and tear your shackles away. And I just picture from that verse just how the cancer just falling away from my body, just like, if the chains were wrapped around you and they literally just fall off. And that not because of anything the doctors have done, but just because the Lord chooses to do that. And then Nahum 1:15 says, look, there on the mountains, the feet of the one who brings good news, who proclaims peace. And once again, right before we went to the doctor, the Lord just reminded me of what he's called Heath and I to do, to not waste this cancer, but to use every opportunity to share with people that we come in contact with the hope that we have in Jesus Christ. And so I just pictured Heath and I standing in front of MD Anderson where it says the feet of those just getting ready to walk in, sharing the good news. And it can even apply to you too, what good news you have and what opportunity has the Lord given you to share that you need to share. So at MD Anderson, we found out that the cancer had already turned, and the doctors, they were shocked, even, there at MD Anderson. They said the surgeon said it looks like he had never had that surgery, that we'd done that surgery 3 months earlier. So they said I'd have to do more chemo, and now, once again, they said I'll have to have, because he had reoccurred so quickly, I would have to have the major surgery, the HIPEC, which we had been praying I would never have to have. But it was just amazing the peace that I felt, even in the midst of hearing that. And we really believed that the Lord had allowed the nurse to tell us the week before so that he could use that week to remind us and prepare us of all that he had done, so that we weren't just receiving the news and shocked, but that we knew what the news was probably going to be. And so he just prepared us. And so we just had a peace that the Lord just would remind us that whole week that God has a purpose for this cancer, even returning so soon. And he wasn't finished with me or with someone that he was wanting to use through this cancer. And that this cancer was not a waste, and that I may not see the results or whatever he's working through, the purpose of this cancer here on earth. So we came back from MD Anderson, and the next week I started chemo again for the second time, and once again it was just the same thing. My friends, it was like we were just all meeting back up again because school had started to meet there every other Monday. And during this time, friends of mine, we were going through a Beth Moore Bible study in James, and it taught me so much. And one of the first points was things that it taught me. A quote that she had written said, "Fellowshipping with Christ in our suffering guards it from purposelessness." And the Lord just, showed me, he was like, can you imagine going through this cancer without him? It would have no purpose. I mean, I don't know how people do that without him. They just cross their fingers and just kind of go day by day and hope that they get through it and don't die and are okay and that they can just go on with their life. But for us, thank God our suffering has a purpose. And once again, I thought of Chloe and Kennedy and Cole and Mr. Rareg's daughter and Mr. Holmes, that there is a purpose for what you're going through if you will walk through it with Christ. The second thing that really meant a lot to me through this was sometimes God answers prayers by alleviating the suffering. Still other times he shows his sufficiency in the suffering, but make no mistake, he never abandons us in our suffering. And she used the example to think of Christ on the cross, and he was literally crying, he's God's very son, and he was literally crying out to God, asking him to take this cup from him, and tears streaming down his face, she says. And Hebrews 5:7 says, he prayed to the one who could save him from death, and he was heard, the Bible says. Yet God didn't save him from death, and she said an infinitely greater work was accomplished through the cross, because Christ is our eternal source of eternal salvation, Hebrews 5:8 says. And can you imagine if God would have answered Christ's prayer according to what he wanted and what he asked? And it's the same way with us. When we cry out, God hears us, whether he answers or heals us. And something greater must be at stake. Something we may not know until we see, but God has a purpose. And Daniel 3:17 says, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us. So he is able to, but he just may not deliver us how we want. A good quote that someone shared with me was, your reactions determine your reach. People will know you by how you face hardship. And that was really important to Heath and I, that the way we react in this, and that we would impact people for eternity. So during this second, now the cancer's reoccurred, and during this second round of chemo, I was going in for my fifth. I was going to do 6 and then go have surgery. And so I had a scan done, and the doctor here had the results, and he said the cancer's growing, the tumors are growing, and that it doesn't look like the chemo's doing any good, so he didn't see any reason to go forward with it. And so he said, let's just wait until you go to MD Anderson next week and see what they say. And so once again, by the time I had gotten home from the doctor's office, my friends had met me there, and they took me out to lunch. And then by the time I had gotten home, my mom and dad and Johnny and Heather, once again from Tulsa, had grabbed their kids from school, their little ones, driven down here. Tony, they were all waiting for me at the house to pray with me and encourage me. And that's the kind of family you want, and that's the kind of family you should be. So we did go back to MD Anderson the next week to see what they had to say, and we went to see the oncologist first, and he said that we were out of options for chemo. And he just was really discouraging, and I can just remember just wanting to lose it. And I just remember saying over and over, Lord, just give me your peace, just give me your peace. I want him to see that my hope doesn't lie in what he's telling me. And so I just remember saying that over and over. And then we went to the surgical oncologist, and he did say we still have options with surgery. And so that was, very encouraging, and we're so grateful for that. And the next day I can remember being home and just getting up, getting the kids ready for school, and then just thinking, why am I okay? Like, I'm fine. I'm not worried about it. I'm not breaking down. I'm not crying. And the Lord literally just told me, he said, daughter, this is my peace that passes all understanding that you're experiencing. And I know it was because, I had received so many texts of people saying they're praying for me, sending me verses, and it was just because of the prayers of the saints that the Lord was answering those prayers and giving me peace. And I can remember my dad over the next couple of days, just every time he'd come over to the house or he'd see me, he'd just put his hand on me and just whisper, Lord, just give her peace, just give her peace. And the Lord did. So my surgery was set for January 21st, this past Monday, but because of insurance problems, it was pushed back. And I remember when we decided to do that, I was thinking, are we doing the right thing? Is this just going to it was pushed back 3 weeks. Is this just going to give the cancer 3 more weeks to grow, where then they're going to say, well, now the surgery is not even an option? And the Lord reminded me of that song, the God of angels' armies. You know who goes before you, you know who stands behind you. The God of angels' armies is always by your side. And now, because of the result of them pushing it back, the doctors want to do another scan. And the Lord just really impressed upon my heart. He was like, just use these weeks to pray that I'll heal you, that I will heal you of this cancer, that when I go for that scan, that it will show nothing. And so then only he could receive the glory. It couldn't be the doctors from the surgery. It couldn't be that the chemo did it. It could only be that the Lord. I have no idea if he's going to do that or not. I'm praying that, and I will pray that until we get those results. But I don't know why he put that on my heart, but that's what I'm praying. Last Saturday, because of where the tumors are, one's in the muscle, and so it just causes a lot of pain. And I was just in an extra amount of pain. And so I can just remember I was crying, and I was just asking the Lord, I was trying to, that verse came to mind about my yoke is, I couldn't really remember it. But I knew, to me, it meant that my yoke, was heavy, and he would take that from me, and he would make that burden light. And so I was thinking, Lord, I'm asking you to take away this pain. I'm begging you, but you won't do it, and I don't understand why. And I went into Heath, and I was like, will you just remind me what this verse is and explain it to me? Because I know that the Lord's able to take away the pain, but I don't know why he won't. And Heath was preparing for his Sunday school lesson the next day, so he was like, yeah, hang on just a minute. So not 5 minutes later, there was a family from CHA that knocks on the door. It was on a Saturday. They drove all the way from Yukon to bring us dinner. And people had done that before, but as I was opening the door, the Lord, and saw them, the Lord just reminded me. He said, I am lightening your yoke. Not in the way you wanted, not in the way you asked for, but I'm lightening your yoke. You don't have to go to the grocery store to buy groceries. You don't have to stand in the kitchen in pain and cook. I'm lightening your yoke. And literally, as they were leaving, another CHA family drove into our driveway. And the past 2 weeks had really been one of my roughest 2 weeks, just as far as the pain. And so I'd been laying a lot, and my computer table in my living room was driving me crazy. Every time we touched it, it almost fall, and so I wanted a new one. And so I talked to this lady about it literally months before. And at that moment, at that time that I had, asked the Lord to take away this pain, her and her husband on a Saturday pull in and give us this computer table. And this computer table is beautiful, better than anything I could have ever dreamed of having. And the Lord just told me, I'm lightening your load. I'm lightening your burden, not in the way that you asked me, but I'm answering your prayer in another way. And then not 10 minutes later, Coach Little Jim calls Heath, and we had been at in Luther at a tournament that day with the junior high, and so he had talked to the coach. Well, the coach had gone to Coach Little Jim and told him that their basketball team wanted to buy the Pray for Jenni shooting shirts that our team wears and wear them the week of my surgery and when they play us. And so Heath got off the phone and told me, and I was just like, Heath, you've got to call them back and tell them, that we want to come speak, to them and tell them thank you and tell them what the Lord's done for us. And so when he called the coach back, we are going to have that opportunity. But once again, Heath just, after that, Heath just looked at me and shook his head and he said, Jenni, do you realize what the Lord's done in the last 30 minutes? And I was like, I know. And we have told this story in the last week, dozens of times. And I told my dad, I said, if he would have answered my prayer and just taken away the pain, it would have been back the next day, and I wouldn't have ever told anyone about it. Oh, the Lord, took away the pain for that night. But because he answered according to his will and what he wanted, we have told I don't know how many people, and only he can receive the glory, because it was obvious that he answered our prayers. And now we have the opportunity once again to share with this Luther team. We would have never had that opportunity. And we can present the gospel to them before they play a game with us at our gym. There's this song by Shane and Shane, Though You Slay Me, that I know many of all of you know, and I listened to it during this second reoccurrence, just hundreds of times. I would play this over and over, and then John Piper comes on in the middle with his little speak. But a few of the words say, you say you do it all in love, that I might know you in your suffering. Though you slay me, yet I will praise you. Though you take from me, I will bless your name. Though you ruin me, still I will worship. And later it says, and I'll know every tear was worth it all. And this has been mine and Heath's prayer, that through this all we'll praise him, we'll bless him, we'll worship him no matter what, and that we'll teach our children to do the same. And that part about every tear is worth it all, we know. It's just so comforting, because we don't suffer without a purpose. We don't suffer without a hope. We know that one day every tear will be worth it all. So there's two things I'd want you to take from this. One is what I've said through this, that God has a purpose for my cancer, for your trial, for your difficulty, for your suffering. However little it might seem to you, he has a purpose for it. And you may not ever see that purpose here on earth. You might have to wait until heaven. But it's not meaningless if you allow God to work through you. So don't lose hope. There is eternal value in what you're going through. And the second thing would be that, the Lord's just reminded me that this earth is not our home. Praise God. I know when I die that I'll go to heaven. And if you don't know, then you should not leave this room until you know where you would spend your eternity. And Heath has faithfully prayed for one of his students this year that says he's not a Christian. And whoever you are, you don't know. God doesn't owe you the chance to come back tomorrow and make that decision tomorrow. You need to do it today. And those classmates of his should be praying faithfully for him. Has he gotten saved yet? Have you heard? That's what this life is about. That's what you should be worried about. Not what you're wearing tomorrow for homecoming, but has that boy asked the Lord into his heart? As I look out here, sometimes I just think, if I could just go back 2 years ago, it'd be so much better and we could just be done. And the Lord just reminds me, I would never want to go back to 2 years ago. He has taught Heath and I so much. He has brought us so much closer together, and to him and to our kids and to my family, that I would never want to go back to 2 years ago. I'm the fortunate one, because I live every day knowing and wonder, is this cancer going to take my life? And so I have the fortune of being able to think and live more with eternal value, and that I'm very grateful. What a privilege. But you should live every day like your last too. Tony had shown me this sermon by Francis Chan, and he gives this great illustration of just this very thing of living every day and like it's your last. And he says, when you stand before God, do you want him just to say, okay, you finished, you got here, you made it? Or do you just want him to hold out his arms and say, well done, my good and faithful servant. You lived well. And that is my desire. we could never begin to thank all of you for everything you've done. When I would see kids wearing Pray for Jenni shirts, I know it was just a CHA shirt that you were wearing, but it meant so much to me, and the bracelets. Seventh graders this year, last year, sixth graders did a walkathon for us to raise money for us. The sophomore class last year gave money and they bought our kids Christmas presents. Dr. DeMoss would fast for me every Thursday. And I really didn't even know her before this started, and she would faithfully fast for me and come by and pray with me. Mr. Bullard, I mean, he has so many responsibilities, so many kids, but in spite of all that, he would help Heath with our bills to turn in for insurance. Heather Olive, I mean, faithfully texts me with encouragement and helps Connor with his discovery. Mr. Huff, Mrs. Huff's husband, is a pharmacist, and he is the pharmacist that we use for our medicine. I mean, the second they call something in, he's like, I'm getting this to you right now, and has just faithfully shown up at our doorstep. I mean, we were flying in from MD Anderson, and I was out of pain medicine, and it was literally like 11:30 at night, and he got up and met Heath so that he could give me the pain medicine that I needed. Becca Hayes, Abby Carlson, Emily Watt, I mean, there's so many of you individually that have done so much for our kids, coming to us and watching the kids and giving of your time. Maddie Starkey this year helped with Christmas presents for the kids. And then the volleyball teams and basketball teams last year and this year will just never understand how special they are to us, because this is a journey that Heath and I never thought we'd been on, but you're living this with us, and you have encouraged him and encouraged me through that so much. And I mean, thank you isn't enough. We really can't express how much the Lord has used you to get us through this. And I mean, my mom and dad and Tony, and their life has changed because of this. The 7 kids coming to stay with them, and the sacrifices they've made and the stress that it's put on them, and they just smile and say, of course we do. They'd never think about not doing it. And Heath has been unbelievable.